Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Corporate Scrutiny Committee. We have some really interesting talks and explorations this evening. But before I start, I would like to welcome Claire Edwards in her first meeting with us. And we just all wanted to say, welcome. We know we've been working with you, but this is now official. So, welcome, Claire, to your first meeting of the Corporate Scrutiny in your present role. You're more than welcome. Okay, so moving to the agenda. When I can find it. Apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. We received apologies from councillors Anne Pandy and Russell Roberts.
Hang on, for some reason I'm not getting... now I have it. Thank you. Members' declaration of interest. Any members here have declaration of interest on any item on the agenda? No? Notifications of requests to address the meeting?
None.
Thank you. Minutes of the meeting held on the 11th of June. Have you all had sight of the minutes of the meeting? Yes, Councillor Mercer.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Page 7, the paragraph at the top. I asked if we could have any information about self-repairing roads, and the officer said that they would look into it and get back to us. Can we have some idea of the progress of that?
Sorry, yes. Louise? Sorry. Thank you. Mr. Candler.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. So through you, Chair. So yes, I did agree that I would look into this, which I've subsequently done. We've liaised with our highways contractor, Kia, and they are in turn now liaising with the wider Kia group with regards to this. They've not had any of the current commercial operators approach them with regards to the self-repairing roads, obviously well used in Europe. So they are looking to engage with them, with the contractors that potentially could take this forward, and to do some trials with the wider Kia group. Obviously, they've got a number of contracts across the country. So what they've agreed to do is that they will do that, and they will keep us informed with regards to those sort of familiarisation tests, and then report back to us. So the person that's leading on that is on leave this week, will be back next week, so we'll instigate that. So I've asked that we just are kept informed, and specifically they're aware now of the interest from this particular scrutiny committee, Chair.
Can I thank the officers for this? And would it be possible, say, to have a further report of some sort, verbal, that's all we need, say in about 6 months' time, to give them time to actually do something about it? Because this is a major opportunity to reduce the incidence of damaged roads in the future. Thank you very much. I apologise for interrupting, Madam Chairman.
Not at all. Thank you very much for your question. So I need a proposer and seconder for the minutes. Proposer, Councillor Mercer. Seconder, Councillor Marks. Are we all in favour? Carried. Thank you. The next item on our agenda is is the Opus report presentation. And I will pass over to you for that. Sorry. Thank you. It's Brad Sinclair and Selina Ayling.
Chair, if I can just introduce our Opus colleagues. So, as you've rightly said, I'm not Opus, but to my left we have Brad Sinclair, who is the Managing Director of Opus People Solutions, and then we also have Selina Ayling, who's our Director of Operations at Opus. So I know that the committee is really keen to get a more detailed understanding of exactly who Opus People Solutions are, how they're set up, what our relationship is with Opus as our preferred contractual supplier of temporary agency workers, and more importantly, how we benefit from this strategic partnership at NNC. So I've also asked Brad and Selina to touch on those points in their presentation, as well as give members an update of some of the current challenges and trends in the UK job market right now, especially since COVID, because I think you'll find that really insightful and it'll give us some further context. So without further ado, if I can pass on to Brad and Selina.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marie. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for allowing us the opportunity to present to you this evening. As Marie mentioned, we're going to talk through sort of Opus, who we are, our governance, how we operate, ultimately also the governance of the joint venture and how that's set up. Also a bit about the context of the current market and what we've seen over the last few years. But I think usefully as well, the different models that are out there and how our model is different to the models that are out there. But ultimately, obviously, the benefits that the joint venture brings to Northamptonshire Council. And then hopefully we'll have some time for some questions at the end, which obviously we welcome. So hopefully this is working in terms of slides. There we go. So who are Opus? Opus actually as a business and an entity was established in 2014. We are a local authority trading company, wholly owned by Suffolk County Council. The Opus in its former guise was operating before 2014, but that's when the local authority trading company was set up in its current form. Ultimately, our vision is to realise opportunities for the people and organisations that we work with and making a difference to the communities that we're operating in. We're very much focused on quality, ultimately looking to reduce the reliance of agency for the organisations that we work with. Being a managed service provider, looking largely after temporary recruitment and other people solutions, that's what we're looking to achieve, and that's what we're about. We are part of a larger group which offers facilities management, design and property, and then Opus looks after the people solutions. The group has national presence. It's one of the largest LATCO groups in the country. But being a local authority trading company, we're very, very passionate about local government and ultimately keeping money in the public sector. So from a governance point of view, Opus East joint venture is owned by Opus, but the other shareholders being yourselves, Northamptonshire, West Northamptonshire, the Children's Trust, Cambridgeshire County Council and Milton Keynes Council. And in terms of the joint venture governance, I will touch on that in more detail on a few more slides, but for here and now I think it's useful to understand our governance sort of internally. So as I say, we are part of a larger group. I sit on a monthly operational board as a director, which also the other two companies within the group sit on and feed into. But in addition to that, we have a group board, which the group chief executive officer, the group chief financing officer, and a number of non-exec directors sit on, as well as the council representative from Suffolk County Council. But in addition to that, we have a separate risk and audit committee and a remuneration committee, which also is run by independent non-exec directors. And then finally, again on a quarterly basis, we have the shareholder group, which is made up of 6 county councillors from Suffolk County Council, and myself and the other directors across the group attend that on a quarterly basis as that extra level of scrutiny. So in terms of Opus as a business, we operate across a number of regions, the east of England, the southeast, the Midlands and the West Midlands, and we have a presence in all of those areas, and we're acting and working with over 20 partners across those regions. But as I said previously, under the group we have national presence from as high up and as north as Scotland and as south down in Devon. So here is just some examples of what we deliver and what we have been delivering over the last sort of 4 or 5 years. We've implemented 19 new MSP contracts with the partners that we're working with, all in local government. Very, very proud to say that we've never actually lost a partner that we've been working with over the 10 years that Opus has been in operation. I've been with the business for 7.5 of those years. So over the years we've developed the skills and knowledge and experience to operate sustainably and successfully. And again, something that I'm also very, very proud of is during that period we've generated returns of over £3 million back to our shareholder partners, with Northamptonshire being one of those. We've saved over £40 million worth of temporary agency spend for the councils that we work with. For the joint venture, the East joint venture that we have, that North is part of, over £16 million worth of savings has been made over the first 4 years that the joint venture was put in operation, which was 25% increased savings than originally budgeted and expected. And the way that we've been able to do that is fundamentally reducing the number of temporary workers that the councils are utilising during that period. So that's a bit about Opus and what we've done today. My colleague Selina will talk in more detail later on about actually how that works day to day and what the benefits are from Northants' point of view. But I think it'd be useful to talk about the market and give a bit of context at this stage. I think from a local government point of view, it's obviously been it's a real difficult position, obviously financially across the country on a national piece, but I think also from a resource point of view, and I think actually that's just as severe as the financial picture. Obviously they go hand in hand, but I think when you look at the years of austerity, where local government were the guinea pigs for IR35 for a number of years before that was implemented into the private sector, Brexit, then obviously COVID, and then since what's happened since then and the impact on local government finances, it's all contributed to a significant recruitment issues in local governments. And I think it's quite clear what we're seeing come out in the statistics since then. So in the Local Government Association market reviews, 94% of councils are experiencing recruitment issues, 90% are signaling severe skills gaps. And sort of as we came out of COVID and the first sort of year and a half, 2 years, where we were seeing demand significantly outstrip vacancies for the first time across the board, not just in the public sector. More than 21% of 16 to 65-year-olds not actively looking for work. That is they're staggering statistics that has had a real impact on recruitment, but it's obviously made it much more challenging for the public sector, where the private sector has really upped its game in terms of paying conditions to compete and meet the demand that we've seen that's been required. But more than £2 billion is spent on temporary recruitment in local government. Unfortunately, that figure is increasing as local government struggles to recruit permanently, has to fill the gaps with temporary recruitment. There's statutory services that are required that need to be filled to ensure that those services are ultimately being met. And obviously the usual ones that get talked about are social care, qualified, unqualified, children's and adults. But again, it's magnified across areas like planning, refuse, and we're seeing again since COVID, areas which normally wouldn't be impacted are seeing significant skills gaps. So it is about doing something different. It It is about looking about what can be done now for the future, so that the sort of demographic in the councils are there for the longevity, not just for the short term. But we're also seeing quite an increase in off-contract in the councils that we've been talking to or taken over. Staggeringly, some councils that we've recently taken over or we're talking to have got 50% of their spend is off contract, which is going to be at significantly higher margins than what it would be if it was on contract. So it's a very challenging market, but there are opportunities. I think new Generation Z's coming through. They are more about values and contributing back to communities. The public sector, that aligns exactly what the public sector is trying to achieve. So it's about tapping into that market. But we speak to a lot of schools, colleges, universities, and a lot of young people don't know the real good work that actually the councils do on their local doorstep, or the potential career that they could have with local councils. So it's about tapping into that market, so that's bringing through the next people for the future, because it's ultimately aligning with what they want to achieve as individuals from their career, which is very different to the previous generations that we currently see in. And I think this is why it's really, really important that the recruitment model that councils and local government have is really important, because the challenge has never been so significant. So I'm just going to touch on a little bit about the options that are out there. Firstly, I'm going to talk about neutral vend model, which is kind of like a straight-through model where ultimately the provider relies on a system that connects the hiring manager that puts on an order, and that sends that straight out to the agencies that are on the supply chain. Sounds easy enough, but I think from that point of view, it puts a lot of the recruitment burden on the manager, so that the manager is spending huge amounts of time on recruitment, dealing with lots of different agencies, and that ultimately can increase the time spent and the financial quality and compliance risk, because that's all sitting with the individual managers. So depending on how equipped the manager is at recruiting, or how busy the manager is, or capacity that they have, obviously that's taken away valuable resource from the day job of running a service. Next, you have a traditional master vend. We are a master vend, but we do like to think that we are different to what's out there, and I'll talk a bit more about that and how that works with the joint venture in a second. But a traditional master vend, you do get a bit of extra increased quality. You do get a bit more resource. There's actually some resource sitting around the system, which does save a bit of managers' time. But both the models I've talked about, what they have in common are usually quite low, very low competitive margins. And our belief is that actually that drives the wrong behaviours, because agencies ultimately will send their best quality candidates to where they're receiving the high margin. They're commercial businesses that want to obviously make as much money from their placements as possible. So if they're getting a very low margin, they will send their best workers to where they're getting a higher margin. Therefore, can drive low quality. Again, compliance risk. Who's checking the compliance? Is there anyone in between checking that compliance? And ultimately, increasing management time, increasing council spend, because that's when it drives off contract up, because agencies will contact managers direct outside of the contract to try and drive the margin up, and potentially you've then got lots of different terms with lots of different managers and lots of different agencies. With the Opus model and the joint venture, ultimately, in my opinion, North Hampshire get the necessary experience required. It's a strategic partnership, striving to improve the quality of your recruitment as a whole, with full transparency, full control in that regard, being a joint venture partner. Increased dedicated resource. We have our own compliance team that is checking every single member of or every worker that is starting, and that is double checked, which significantly reduces the manager time and significantly reduces the risk. But also by making sure that we've got standardised margins and limiting off contract, it means that we can give best financial value to the council. So the joint venture, we have a TECL compliant limited company set up. There's representatives at board level on that company. So Adele O'Wiley, who's obviously not here, is on that board as the council representative, and we have the same for the different councils that are also shareholders, which again provide monthly information. We meet on a quarterly basis, but that information is full management accounts, full financial information, full operational detail of all of the contracts within the joint venture, not just for Northants. So that is fully programmed and fully made aware, so there's that full transparency. But in addition, risk register, strategic plan of what the joint venture is trying to achieve, and a financial audit each year, with it being its own limited company. There's a financial audit carried out by, at the moment, the auditors are Grant Thornton, but also a dividend strategy and an approach to compliance. As you would expect also with any arrangement like this, there's still the quarterly contract reviews, which Marie and Selina sit on, and they would talk about operational matters to make sure that obviously the day-to-day operation is running for the best service possible. But we do try and create a one-team ethos. Our team, the way we would like it to operate is that it's an extension of Marie's team, so that we're making sure that actually we're additional resource that ultimately supports the council. Obviously, another benefit that is brought by the joint venture is obviously best value, but the dividend return. So to date, the joint venture has contributed 1.58 million in dividends back to joint venture partners. And then, as I say, from an operational point of view, that strategic partnership, overall workforce planning and social value back to the council, which I'm going to let Selina talk more about because I don't want to talk too much detail about that now. So finally from me, before I do hand over to Selina, as I say, we do look at the whole picture. We don't just look at temporary recruitment. We've got a requirement, therefore we fill it, and it's reactive. We are trying to be proactive so that we're looking at the whole workforce priorities and the priorities of North Hampshire Council, and then we align what we're trying to do with those priorities to ensure that we're trying to support what's trying to be delivered from a whole recruitment point of view, not just a temporary recruitment point of view, because to a certain we can then help improve the temp to perm conversion ratios. We can make sure that we're not competing with a permanent recruitment campaign. It's a complete joined up way of working that ultimately contributes to supporting the recruitment as a whole. And in terms of temporary recruitment, the highest part of the spend is the worker pay and the statutory on costs that come attributed to that. It's not the margin. So the best way to tackle temporary recruitment spend and make significant inroads into trying to reduce that is focusing on the actual workers that are in place. How can we reduce the number of workers needed or improve the quality so that actually that can fundamentally significantly reduce the amount being spent on temporary recruitment, as opposed to just focusing on little bits around the edges like margin or other bits like that that are not going to make a significant dent in overall performance, but also financial gains. So I will now hand over to Selina, because I'm conscious I've been speaking for quite a while, who will just take you through that day-to-day operational model and bring that to life a little bit. Thank you.
Hi all, thank you Brad. So Brad, as you've touched on some of this, how we work is around strategic workforce planning. So we have the immediate need of the councils we work with ourselves, and then we have the immediate need, the medium term, and then the long-term view. What we've realised is no one has that golden egg. You know, no one has that magic wand with the challenges, but actually if we have that helicopter view of understanding what the challenges are faced by the individual directorates in the local authority, we can bespoke a targeted campaign against them. So then that's what's crucial, because not one size fits all, excuse the term, but when we look at refuge, it's a very different target audience campaign that we need to target, as opposed if we look at planning or social work, etc. If you can go to the next slide. In regards to our strategic offering, so we absolutely operate how any other MSP would operate. Brad touched on it earlier. The most complementary process we could be is an extension of Marie's team, and actually looking at what is the strategic plan, how can we work collectively together to drive that quicker, actually help to complement that. A lot of our reports we look at is the tenure of the temps and how can we convert them to permanent. I think what's really important when I sit at board level, and especially Opus East, is around what are we doing to reduce spend, what are we doing to actually build a sustainable future. We are very transparent, so in our quarterly review packs, they're broken down by directorates, and in detail, each directorate says a summary of everything there. If you can just go to the next slide, because it sort of links onto this, thank you. We are a people-led organisation. So how our team works is there's an operations manager who's dedicated to North Northamptonshire, but there's a dedicated team. So we're split into vertical experts. As you can see up there on the screen, we specialise in each of these fields, the senior management, professional and technical, which allows the council to get to know that individual who works for them. We will fill directly when we can, but never at the cost of the placement. We are underpinned by 350 agencies. And because we fill directly, there's a fine balance around that to actually have a really good relationship. So our suppliers are just as important as our clients, to have that relationship that flows down the partnership. With the 350 suppliers, we have an open door policy that anyone can sign up to us, and especially small bespoke agencies to North Northamptonshire. As I touched on earlier, this is a short example or some slide decks of what we produce on a quarterly basis. We have the overall spend, but we're very transparent with spend by directorate, etc. What you'll find with this is we also measure direct fill. And when I say about direct fill, is how much is filled by the joint venture. So at the moment, we're at 40% direct fill, which is really important. It's at a cheaper rate than we can buy from suppliers, but also that goes back to the joint venture in dividends as well. In regards to the spend throughout the slide, spend throughout the local authorities, obviously, I'm saying obviously, but you're aware, children's is the highest, followed by adults, health and partnerships and housing, and third is place and economy. Go to the next slide, please. When I was talking about strategic working and partnership, this is one area we need to work at across public sector. So our commitment to building a sustainable workforce is very evident in some of the work we are doing at the moment. The reason why we're investing so much into this is, as Brad touched on the numbers earlier on, is around, I myself have been into university and schools, and it's just not, the kids aren't thinking it, I'm saying kids, but different people aren't thinking it as a career choice, and we need to change that now. Some of the work we're doing, there's some videos up there, obviously they're not North Northamptonshire, but Adele and Rochelle are booked in next month. I'm getting a few other colleagues to do videos to actually bring to life what public sector's about. There's over 800 jobs within local authorities, and people don't realise that, so it's about bringing that to life. I'm going to sneeze, so please excuse me.
Bless you.
Thank you. So we're trying to bring that to life in a town hall map, that youngsters or people thinking about going back into public sector can go onto a town hall map and realise that job exists in a local authority. So this is just a snippet of some of the videos we've done over the last couple of months, and we're trying to pick particular careers here that people may not have thought about, and the career journey they've gone on to come here, where they come from private sector, etc. Some of the other stuff we're doing at the moment, so if you're aware of the local government association are launching a national campaign, which we helped launch with them last week in the region. We're doing some work, and they're sharing some of the videos we're doing, because we're one step ahead of that. We're also sitting on the London School of Technology on the advisory board around trying to get them to think about courses that feed into public sector. And the other thing we've just launching this month is a training platform for all of our temps. So whether they're via our supply chain or via our supply chain or directly with us, they have access to a training platform. Now, with AI coming in, everyone keeps saying we need to get ready for AI, but the biggest skill gap is actually softer skills. So this is, we're targeting the softer skills, and we are doing some work with the over 50s, trying to get the over 50s back into work and do some mentoring with the younger generations. So there's a lot going into this, but this is about chipping away at the moment to make a better future. Was that it?
Yeah.
Thank you. And that's it. I sped through them, so if you have any questions.
Thank you very, very much, and very interesting presentation. So thank you for coming and bringing that to us. I'm going to open up for questions in a minute. We have a number of key lines of inquiry, and you've touched on some of those in your presentation. So I'm glad we're thinking along the same lines. One of the first questions I've got to ask is, was about that workforce planning. So to hear your reply on that was very encouraging. But how does the use of agency staff link into the strategy? I think is one of the first questions I'd like to ask, please.
Yes, of course. So it's that helicopter view we always do. It's about understanding demographics, looking at what the ratio is temporary. Sometimes, like I said, we need to look at individual areas. So if we're looking at the refuge or the waste department, it's good sometimes to look at temporary to understand we've got the commitment of the workers before they go permanent. If there's issues in certain skill set shortages, and we know there's not the resource out there, that's when we look at the long-term planning of actually where are the work streams. So we break down in what are the potential work streams that we can use. So whether we're working with universities, so universities and all the different streams that we can feed in to there. What we're finding is if we do true workforce planning, some of that will go away. Not all of it, like I said, the magic wand isn't there, but with workforce planning, I'm going to use planning for example, we know 16 months in advance for all the work streams, but sometimes, because everyone's so busy with their day jobs, HR and recruitment only hear about it a month before. So if we can get that early time put in, we outsource to some of these consultancies, but then we all fish from the same pond, so we can go out and start building our pools if we know about that earlier. But that's around really trying to get people to work and think that step ahead.
Councillor Watt, David Watt. I keep doing this to you, Councillor.
You do, Chair, thank you. I just wanted to give a couple of practical examples of where Opus have helped us in the past, particularly around the use of agency staff. So within a couple of my areas, we get time-limited funding, be that grant funding from government, be it money that comes through the NHS. Quite often it's not recurrent. So often we will work with Opus to employ people on a temporary basis. But where that money has become longer term, we have seen conversions from temporary to permanent as a result of that. So a couple of examples, one of them being the refugee resettlement team that we have time-limited funding based around both our Ukraine and Afghan programmes, which enabled us to go out via Opus to employ those people. It's always distracting when the core starts up, isn't it? So that's just one of those examples.
Opening it up now to others. Councillor Brown, and then I'll come to Councillor Griffiths and then Councillor Lee.
Thank you very much. I think David has just stolen my thunder on my question, actually, with that answer. So thanks very much for that, and thanks very much for the presentation. I have got a backup one, so we're okay. I have got another question. I was surprised to hear you say that you're always looking to reduce reliance on agency staff. It's quite intriguing to me that, given the business you're in, to hear you say that on more than one occasion. So I was just wondering how does that manifest itself with North Northants Council in particular, and how that kind of works, and you know, a bit more of the nuts and bolts and details on that would be appreciated. Thank you.
Yeah, I think obviously being owned by the public sector, I think there's a balance between obviously making sure we've got a sustainable business that can operate versus trying to make as much money as possible. So I think that's where ultimately where we sit from a value point of view is that we want to improve public sector full stop, and the bit that we contribute to that we want to improve and ensure. But I think obviously to make that happen, permanent recruitment needs to be the bedrock of each service, and temporary recruitment should just supplement that as and when it's needed. And I think unfortunately local government got itself in a position where temporary and agency recruitment is propping up statutory services, which is obviously a very challenging position to be in. So I don't believe, and we don't believe, that that's good for the longevity of public sector. But also there is enough work to be going around. There is enough there to make it sustainable. It's about actually doing the right thing and making sure that we can contribute to the public sector's longevity, and ultimately that means trying to reduce temporary spend, full stop, because it's not sustainable for the public sector to continue to do that. So at some point something's going to go horribly wrong, which isn't going to be good for anyone. So that's kind of where we're coming from for that, and that's why it's really important for us. There will always be temporary recruitment there. You're never going to get it to zero, but there's enough out there, I think, to make it sustainable and to make it the longevity there for public sector. Hope that answers your question.
Councillor Griffiths.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And this inquiry is equally addressed to our own HR representatives as well as Brad and Selina from Opus, and thank you for the presentation. NNC has an ambition to be an employer of choice, but we appreciate that roles within services such as planning are difficult to recruit to. I am aware of, and I welcome the apprenticeship initiative that we have within our own planning ambitions. What else is being done and can be done to help us and help our own staff to fill hard to recruit posts from within our existing resources and the local area? I realise that the presentation has touched on this, but I wonder if you could expand a little bit, and perhaps a comment from Marie as well. Thank you.
So thank you for the question. You're absolutely right. We've got to a stage, and hopefully the paper that follows this around pay and grading will emphasise this a little bit more. But we've got to the stage where we are, putting together a proper workforce plan, which involves apprenticeship, and it involves some of the areas that Opus touched on that we are also doing as an organisation around creating those connections with our colleges, our universities, our schools, because it's absolutely spot on. Individuals, and students don't realise the potential roles that are out there in terms of local government. So we have that as part of our workforce plan. We're also doing internal apprenticeships where people want to change their career because we have so many skilled individuals within the workforce, as you rightly point out, that our new pay and grading job families actually supports that career pathway and supports people in finding different routes and moving sideways or moving into a different area. So we need to exploit that as well, which ties in with our, our development plan to upskill our workforce. And in terms of, the wider community, it is about getting the message out there. And we certainly have vacancies. And we are seeing, I think, and I might be overstepping the mark, but we are seeing the market pick up now. And we are seeing people returning to the workforce that in COVID left to try their hand at interim or leave altogether and retire early. We had quite a mass exodus actually during COVID. So we are seeing that come back. So it's reaching all of those areas, and we do need to get our branding out there and really, and we've talked about it, and I've talked about it with Guy and the communications team. We need a real hook in and a proper kind of, sorry to use the term, USP to get people on board and like, what can we offer that no one else can offer? And actually, we've got great ambitions and we just need to start getting that message out there loud and clear. And it is trickling out there and starting to. And we're seeing a pickup in the market. We advertised a business support role the other week. We had 100 applications. 100 applications for one role, and we're struggling now to shortlist those 100 applications. But that's great news, and you can definitely see that, you know, a real positive uptake in the market. So it's all those things which form a proper workforce plan. And I know, Chair, we've talked about that and about a strategy and possibly sharing that at a future meeting. So we would welcome that, which would obviously highlight those areas even more. But if I've missed anything, I'm happy to hand over to my colleagues at Opus.
I think you've covered most of it, but I'll just touch on it. I think the USP, or the EVP as it's known as well, is paramount, is around selling what North Northamptonshire is about. I knocked that off. And that's key. It's around all the people that are travelling out of the town to go and get work. It's trying to attract them back, especially around planning. It's spinning it round. Planning, now we're seeing on statistics, employment, it's not pay anymore. At the top, it's actually giving back, doing something more purposeful. It's very different across the generations, if you look into the generations, but actually 60% of all the generations are saying they want a more purposeful job. So that's what I'm saying, we're trying to tap into the youngsters, but different generations as well. And I think that's you've got to build that picture. You know, do you want to design the town? Do you want to be part of the future? Part of the town hall map I touched on earlier is trying to bring that to life. We're actually going in and videoing in some of the town halls, trying to change people's perception of what they perceive as a planning department and what it looks like, and showing people some of the exciting projects they are part of. What we are encouraging people to do as well is when they do have interim people in, or high-level consultants in, is utilise them. Get them to mentor our perm staff, get them to mentor people, so actually that money spent, actually we're chipping away at it.
Sorry, can I just add one more quick point on that, I think, because it's a really good question. I think about that employer of choice, and I think that's why it's even more important that the workforce planning is joined up between permanent and temporary recruitment, because we could be absolutely amazing and do what we can do, but if the organisations that we're working with, people don't want to work there, well, there's only so much we can do. So it has to be a joined up affair, both the council and us as Opus in partnership, making North Northamptonshire an employer of choice, and that's the only way it can work.
Thank you very much.
Can I just follow up on that, if I may, Madam Chairman? It's music to my ears, and I'm sure it is some of the other councillors here today, because we've got excellent partners locally. I've done a lot of work in Wellingborough with Tresham, and they are a brilliant organisation to work with. We've got Malton College. We've also got students that have trained, got degrees and honours in one direction. My son's one of them. That, you know, he's been unable to get employment in that area. But we've got to give the message that, you know, local government is a good place to work, and they can have a change of direction, so to speak. So I think we must remember those students, that their original plan has probably not materialised. Thanks. Thank you, Chairman.
I'm coming to Councillor Lee and then Councillor North. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. An internal audit report from August last year highlighted that some consultants were appointed through a direct award with Opus, even though consultants are not a spent category that we have with Opus. The internal auditor said that an approved procurement waiver should have been used. This council spent a lot of money on consultants, so I wonder, why are consultants not a spent category in Opus? And if we are awarding contracts directly with you, do we follow the rules? Have we taken this internal auditor's report to heart? Thank you.
Apologies, I think Claire Edwards would like to step in.
Claire.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for your question. I think from Opus's perspective, this is an internal compliance issue rather than what Opus would or would not provide to us. So they would not necessarily distinguish between those two categories. That's for us to decide internally between how we classify them and what compliance routes we should have followed and applied. So that's why it's an internal audit report, not an external compliance issue. So that's something that we as an organisation need to ensure that we followed those correct procedures from a procurement route or from an IR35 perspective as well.
Thank you. Councillor North.
Thank you, Chair. This is part comment and part perhaps an unfair question, but I appreciate obviously the slides in relation to obviously what you do and where we're at and in relation to the questions already in the future. My point or question, Chair, is that you know all the members here are from legacy councils, and one of the issues is some of the things mentioned today in relation to try and recruit, which is fair and right in relation to schools and people coming back, and a lot of this has been tried before. And I think my concern, maybe, Chair, or question is, well, I mean, nationally, what is happening in relation to the big three, which you have obviously mentioned, which is obviously planning children's and adults. My old legacy council very heavily relied on planning in relation to agency staff. Things were tried in relation to obviously the things that have been mentioned today, but that hasn't nationally really changed the shortage in planners. And I appreciate the answer about career change or going to schools or different generations coming back in. But we've had these issues before, Chair, and my concern is, to be honest, for the last 15 years or more, certainly in relation to planning, in spite of all the things that you're doing and has been said and being done nationally, it hasn't really changed anything. And obviously what we've got, and I'm obviously only using planning as an example, is obviously then we have this massive agency cost base. And in fairness, sometimes, certainly in relation to planning, unfortunately, maybe agency staff who've got no ties to the local area. So the council's hit double bad. It's double bad in relation to the advice we get, and it's obviously hit financially as well. And I said it might have been a bit of an unfair question, but I appreciate everything that's going on around the country, but it doesn't seem to be solving the issues around the key three. In spite of the variation of what those roles can give, in my view, it's still not really changing nationally, and we're still relying quite heavily on agency.
It's a valid point. I think you're right on a lot of levels that unfortunately things haven't changed and are not changing quickly. I think in terms of some of the national pictures, just taking social care, in my opinion, the national consultation that's been happening hasn't gone far enough. It's not going to do enough to change the picture here and now that is desperately needed in the social care space. So there are things that are needed nationally. But it doesn't mean that we can't try and do things that are going to make marginal gains in areas where they're needed, because if we don't try and do things differently, it's only going to get worse. Whereas if we try and do things differently or try and look at how we can improve it, it will at least make some gain. It will create some opportunities for improvement longer term, not just for now, the quick fix, because there's been too many plasters being put over recruitment in terms of resourcing with temporary recruitment for too long. And it's about, okay, we need to start making decisions now that means it's going to be better in 2, 3, 5 years' time. There's no guarantee, because obviously it's a very competitive market, but it's about attempting to make it better so that it's actually going to build a sustainable future for the public sector. Because otherwise, I think if it's not, then it's going to never happen or never materialise. But that's what we're trying to create and try and do. But I think there's a part of also what we're doing with a lot of the councils we work with, and that's why the Opus East joint venture works really well, is working in collaboration with neighbouring councils and authorities, not in direct competition, which has happened for far too long, again, in my opinion.
Just to complement that, so Councillor North, you're absolutely right. I've been in the industry now nearly 20 years. But social work is the one area, obviously, when at the councils I look after, it's normally the highest spend. And I've sat on regional boards, very passionate about actually we can make a difference. The problem we've had is there's a retention in the area as well. So the life cycle's 8 years. What I would say is this is the first year in the last 5 years we've seen a difference. Last year there was a shortfall of 1,100 social workers in between locum and permanent. It's only just shy of 600, and it's changing the market. People actually convert into perm because they've shifted it, and that's to do with the regional, the national approaches, the MOUs. Something else we've been working on, and I think this is where we need to work collectively all together. We've worked with the London Authority for Building Control. So if I go back, my career as a local authority, building control was actually one of the biggest skill gaps back in the day. It still is now. They approached us about 18 months ago to say, especially with the recent reports, you know, we're going to increase the requirements in building control, and we're going to need to invest a lot of workers into this field. We've successfully recruited 189 workers for them over 5 cohorts. Now, there was a pot of money the government gave them to invest in that. There's a 3-year training programme. But do you know what? That shows it can be done. It doesn't matter whether that's building control, that's planning, that's social work. So when things are joined up, it can. So I really encourage that regional approach. Planning's the one area I keep saying everything we've done in social work can work if we do it in planning, but we need to be joined up. The problem we've got as well, if we're being really candid, all of these commercial companies or consultancies, it's a livelihood, it's where they're making money, so they will counteract it as we can. But I think it's about us all getting in a room, and we can make, as Brad said, the marginal difference, and it's about keeping going and keep changing our direction. Thank you.
Thank you. George.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to, I suppose, just provide a bit of a real-time update where we are with planning, because I know that is of an interest and has been previously well covered in the former Planning Transformation Board. So at the moment we've got 31, or had 31 agency staff within the planning system, and that's both development management and planning policy. Now, some of those, three are self-funded. So they're self-funded through a planning policy agreement where a developer will specifically pay for the time of those staff. So there's no actual cost to the council, but because that cost is incurred by the developer. But we do log those, and they do fall into our data. We also have so we regularly monitor the agency staff across place and economy, and I know David does across his area, as do other high use areas that have been flagged by Opus. So I can confirm that we've are either recruiting to or have reduced 15 of those 32 roles in planning in the last 2 months, and there's further recruitment taking place, and that's part of our wider review of the planning system. We've also, through the Pathways to Planning scheme that the Local Government Association have run, we've successfully recruited 3 graduates into Northamptonshire. So again, that's about trying to grow our own and creating a career pathway within planning that is a difficult sphere and marketplace, as Selina and Brad have both said, but we've got to constantly keep thinking about different approaches, I think, and sell Northamptonshire the place, as well as Northamptonshire the council, to people coming into this particular market. But I suppose I just wanted to give that update to you, Chair and members, that there is quite a lot of activity going on, and I know it is of a particular interest to a number of members on this committee, so I just want to provide that reassurance. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. One last question before we wrap up. Sector standards across the departments, there's an expectation that standards are rising. So For example, I know that within housing, you've got to have certain qualifications. Within care, again, there's an expectation that, you know, you can't just walk into a job. You've got to have those sort of ongoing training, standards higher set. So will that be a problem in the future, especially around housing, where you're expected to have degree level, you know, just wonder where are the hot spots, I suppose, for the future? You know, is it green jobs? Is it those sector standards? Is it, you know, where are we going to have to look next after planning?
Thank you for that question. Just to answer, to cover that off, at the moment we're going through the fourth revolution around, am I saying that right? Industrial? Yeah, I'm getting my sayings wrong. Revolution around AI. So it's unfolding all the time, but what is very clear, and I will come to your question to answer it, is, like I said earlier, people want a job where they're giving back. So don't underestimate our weight in local authority and in the market, and the investment that we need to put into the unis and the schools. I heard a shocking statistic a couple of months back that on average it's £1.80 the government put into educating children on careers. So the schools just do not have the capacity to educate them. So if we can get in there now, and we all know, I don't know if you remember from being in school, that it's very impactful when people come in, and we can talk about them building their towns, building and making a difference. So we have to be doing that. You're absolutely right. So we have the different initiatives that come in that say you need this, and then you'll have other bodies to say, well, hang on a minute, if you do that, the workforce is this small, it's going to reduce down. So we have different bodies, and we work with APSCO, who lobby as well, who help drive the statistics and are concerned about that. So that happens, but it's around the workforce planning again. So if we know that, and we know that's coming, and we know we've got an ageing demographics, then we look at and we get together and think, well, how can we counteract this? And as some of the councillors earlier, we then chip away at it. So it's a little bit of a woolly answer, but actually everything is manageable if we tackle it together.
I think just to add to that as well, I think in the past, the public sector has been too rigid with its job descriptions, its requirements, its qualifications, and there's been less aligning skill sets to the roles to see actually where you can bring skills in and then retrain or convert degrees, etc. Whereas I think the private sector has been much better at that. So I think again, there's parts of where not just turning someone down because they don't quite have the right degree or the right it's actually saying, well, what skills do they have, and actually can we invest a little bit to make sure there's a conversion so they then can do that. I think there's those elements as well that I think are going to make that difference, whereas at the moment sometimes it's far too rigid for people, and it's a barrier to people to get into the market or into the public sector.
Yes, Marie.
So Brad's covered some of it, and I think he's absolutely right, and it goes back to the point that Councillor Griffiths made. We've got so many talented individuals out there. So it used to be we were, you know, recruiting for perfection, and you have like a person spec and a job description, and you have to tick every box on there. And actually what we should be doing is recruiting for potential as well, and transferable skills. So I think, you know, going back to your point about, oh, will it be a degree next, then a master's, or actually we shouldn't really be thinking about that, because we can train people and develop them on the job. We have apprenticeships in place to do that, and we have all manner of other development programs. So I think, you know, it's about looking wider as you said, and about tapping into potential. I didn't start my life in HR. I started as a teacher, but actually there's so many transferable skills there that, you know, I moved across and I changed careers. And it's never too late to do that. So I think it's about looking wider, as Brad said, and not being so restrictive. And we've already started doing that through our application, because anyone who's filled in a local government application form, it's you need a degree to do that anyway. So it's about, you know, being more flexible. And we have such a neurodiverse population as well. We need to tap into the widest possible pool that we can. So we are looking at that, and obviously hoping to develop that stream too.
The last question, Councillor Griffiths.
Well, it's just following up on that. That's so, to me, this is so important, and one of the things that's come out, we've got to do that, because there's some brilliant kids out there. And guess what? I didn't start out being a counsellor, but I'm sure not many of us did here. But you know, that's how life develops. But I think of all the things that we've discussed, this is the real key that I'm hearing. And maybe that we can, in 12 months' time, look at where we've moved on from this, if that's something that we can do as a committee, Madam Chairman.
And we're just going through the recommendations now, so
yep, fine.
That would be brilliant. So in terms of, I've got a number of recommendations that the committee have view of the workforce planning, and if we can help during that, that would be brilliant. Do we know the sort of timelines for, you know, the development of that strategy?
I mean, it is in progress, and clearly we are a data-led organisation now as well, so we will be looking at all our data, and I know Tom's going to touch on some of our workforce data later. But I would say within the next 6 months, Chair, that we would have a workforce strategy that we would be more than happy to share with the committee.
Thank you. And then another of the recommendations there is, obviously within that workforce planning, that we're investing in our people to fill those hard-to-reach posts as well, to enable us to become that employer of choice. And by pursuing in some way the Investor in People award, and how we go along with that, if that's acceptable to you. Then I will say thank you very much to Opus for coming and giving us such a really interesting presentation. I know that most of us would like to see sight of the presentation itself. So if we can have that, that would be good. And if you want to leave, please do. You've probably got a long way to travel back. Thank you.
I'll take it you're going to move those recommendations, Chair.
Sorry. Yes. Can I have a mover and a seconder? I've got 3 movers and 4 seconders.
I knew you were just about to do it. Don't worry.
Thank you very much. And are you all in favour of that? Yeah. Thank you very much. Recommendations done. Do you all want a quick 5 minutes whilst just carry on? Okay. Marie, over to you, and then we'll go for a comfort break, I think.
I think the music's conveniently started up again, hasn't it? Just as we'll be singing along, but I don't actually recognise it, so I'm not. Oh, it's Shania Twain, sorry, yes. Oh, gosh, yeah. No, I definitely won't impress you much. Thank you very much, Chair. So this next report, I'm really pleased, actually, to introduce it and present it. Hopefully you've all had a chance to read it. So this is about the progress that we've made on our pay and grading project. And we did some all-member briefings back in the beginning of summer last year, and then also we had a full council meeting at the end of summer last year that agreed our proposal for a new pay and grading structure that was underpinned by a job family framework, and we talked briefly about that earlier, about the career progression and promoting career pathways. And we also had a new set of terms and conditions. Why was this important? We were carrying quite a big risk. You can imagine it's a very complex project. I'm probably underplaying that, but at the point of unitary, our biggest risk was we didn't have our own set of pay terms and conditions. What we had, rightly so, because it was transfers in from all our predecessor councils, we had a myriad of different terms, condition and pay arrangements. Now, that didn't impact the TUPE population who transferred in because they were protected by law. But what it did mean is when we went to recruit new individuals from that 1st of April date, or when people moved, because I had quite a bit of transformation, as you'll recall, into new positions, we did not have our own set of pay terms and conditions to appoint them to. So we had to agree an interim position. And the interim position, which was the safest and most transparent, was wherever that vacancy arose from, whether it be a former Welwyn Borough position or a former Corby Borough Council position, we used the associated pay terms that was connected to that vacant post. And that was the interim position that we found ourselves in, and it was not sustainable because that did present some risks. So potential equal pay challenges because we were just using a former councils and that wasn't relative to our organisation and how our organisation was structured. Also, more importantly, which ties into the previous conversation, it was really difficult to attract people because there we were saying, come and work for us, we've got a great job. By the way, it's on interim terms and conditions. We don't know what your new terms and conditions are going to look like because we're currently going through a pay and grading exercise. Well, if that's not enough to put some people off, it was a really challenging period, as you can imagine. Not for everyone, because we did manage to recruit, but what we've seen since we've implemented, which the report didn't really go into, was we've seen a significant increase in the number of new starters that we're able to attract and less turnover. So we're able to retain people as well, because when you're in that uncertain period about not knowing whether your pay is going to go up, down or stay the same, it's not a great retainer. And we want to be an employer of choice. So what we saw is, a turnover rate at the beginning of unitary for 2022, and that was sitting at 18%. Just to give you an idea, the benchmark against other public sector organisations sits around the 11% mark for turnover in the latest statistics. We've gone from an 18% turnover rate to just under 9%, or 9.49%, which Tom will hopefully go into more detail, so not to steal your thunder, Tom. And we've seen that because people are more certain now. We've implemented phase 1, pay and grading, which covered 1,300 people. At the start of unitary, we had 80% of our staff were on their protected TUPE terms. But as we've restructured and we've appointed people, that has switched to almost 50-50. So we've got almost as many people who are now on the new pay and grading terms, which is great as an organisation. But what that means is we've now got almost 50% on the TUPE protected terms who are now looking to their co-workers and saying, I'm doing a very similar job to you. In fact, I'm doing a similar or the same job, and my pay terms and conditions aren't as favourable. So you can imagine after the success of implementing stage 1, and the report obviously highlights that for the majority of those individuals, it was a positive outcome. So 86% of the 1,300 people that were impacted by phase 1 either stayed the same in terms of their salary or their salary increased, and also more favourable terms and conditions. And the TUPE population were then, well, when are we going to be pay and graded? Rightly so. And We couldn't harmonise the workforce. It would be illegal to arbitrarily put everyone on the same terms and conditions, because not all of them would find themselves in a more favourable position. And that's when it's a detriment to the individual. So they're still on their protected terms and conditions. But what we can do, and what Jason, the leader, Jason Smithers and Councillor Smithers, and Adele, they were committed to looking at the TUPE population where it would be more favourable. We want to be an employer of choice. We want to be, one council. So we have a one council programme about integrating our workforce. And so the second part of the paper, as well as obviously detailing our progress with the implementation from phase 1, now highlights the need, and we've got a roadmap to now deal with the TUPE population, so that those people where it would be more favourable, because we've done the majority of the hard work, dare I say, in terms of we've got the process, we've got the working relationships with our trade unions, we've got an agreed pay structure, but the people who now want to choose voluntarily to move across, we're going to give them the opportunity to do that. So the second part of the paper hopefully highlights, which I think it's important the committee understands, is pay and grading hasn't finished. It was supposed to be a discrete project to deal with the interim situation, and I don't think we quite appreciated how strongly some of our TUPE population would feel once obviously the outcomes were out there and known. But it's absolutely the right thing to do, and we want, as I said, we've got a target of about 80% of our workforce. We'll probably never get 100% at this stage because of the fact that we will still have people who are on more favourable protected terms, and we need to protect those because that's the legal thing that we need to do. So hopefully the paper gives an indication about the progress that we've made, and we did say that we would come back to the committee after the full council to give an update on progress. So I'm really pleased to say that phase 1 of the programme has been implemented, and we're starting to see the positive outcomes of that. And now that the Opus have left the room, we're also seeing, and it's a combination of things, not only are we able to recruit more to some of those hard-to-fill vacancies, because we deliberately set our pay line at a competitive pay line compared to some of our, well, certainly some of our neighbouring councils and also some of our, our private organisations. So we're certainly starting to see recruitment pick up, and we are starting to see a reduction in our dependency on agency staff. So it does take time, obviously, to work its way through the system, but we talked about some of those hotspot areas. We're really competitive in what we pay our social workers, our qualified social workers, and in fact we pay more than some of our neighbours because we have deliberately set our pay line. And more importantly, some of our lower paid workers that transferred from the county council, we are paying them more in terms of their hourly rate. We're paying them several steps above the national pay scale, and we've deliberately chosen, as I say, to pay above that pay line so that we're competitive and that we can start to attract some of those harder to fill roles. So I hope that gives you a bit of an insight to what's in the report. I am more than happy to take any questions, but thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much. Is that you? Councillor Brown.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think you've answered some of this, so excuse me, I will read it in its entirety. Could you explain more about what the strategy is to integrate staff to the new terms and conditions? Is there a target of the percentage of staff on the new terms and conditions, and by when are we hoping to achieve that? And are there any performance indicators, and what does success look like?
I'm going to hand over, if that's okay, to my colleague Jo Tucker, who is an instrumental part of the project team. So she'll be able to talk you through just the timelines and what that looks like. And our target is 80%. So, but I'll pass you over to Jo.
I don't know if I can remember all those questions, but I'll try my best. So the process, you asked about the process. The process right at this minute is that we're going through a huge data analysis to make sure that we identify all the staff on all the correct jobs. So because it's a continuous, restructures and reorganisations, we need to make sure we offer the right terms and conditions to the right people. So we're doing that. And we're also doing a piece of work to look at any other allowances that are being paid, so that people on the TUPE terms actually know transparently, this is what I get now and this is what I'm going to be offered, so that they know that they can make the choice. So that we are planning, we're working very hard to do that. We're planning to do that in October and give people 4 to 6 weeks to decide. So that's for people who are in a matched job. So then the implementation date, you can see on the roadmap for that, fingers crossed, will be the 1st of January. So then there's the other host of people who are in unmatched jobs. Then we'll be going through the process with our trade union colleagues to match all those jobs, to give them a job, family and a pay grade. And then the same process for them, to go to them to ask them if they want to transfer. And again, I'm crossing my fingers. So that will be in June. Have I answered everything, or was there more parts?
Yeah, I think that's fine. That's good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've got a quick question, and I'm coming to Councillor Griffiths and then Councillor North.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This is a bit like going back in time, because pre-shadow and shadow, and some of my colleagues here will remember, this was discussed as a huge concerning area. And I'd just like to say we expected it to be done sooner, certainly within the first term of office. But I'd like to applaud Maria and the whole team, and in fact all of the officers that have got us to where we are, because we recognise it was a huge task. And guess what? Now we've got a new government, and I'm sure there'll be some pay negotiations and claims coming forward. But no, I'd just like to say that, Chairman, we do appreciate this was a huge task, and it's took a long time, but we're nearly there. So well done, thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor North?
Thank you, Chair. I would echo those comments. I think putting together 5 legacy T's and C's just must have an incredible job. So I echo those comments. But that's not what I'm going to ask, Chair. Money is the thing I'm going to mention. I appreciate we haven't set the budget yet, but you mentioned one council, and obviously the council as a whole obviously put a pot in for phase 1. It's obviously the next phase is that's, as far as I can see, that's not indicated in the paper in relation to how that's going to be funded. And one of the slight concern I could have, Chair, is although it's voluntary about the harmonisation of those on protected TUPE coming across, what I wouldn't like to see, Chair, is if it's obviously funded within directorates, that it doesn't happen because there isn't enough money in the budget of the directorates. That's where we're not one council. And I know we haven't set the budget yet. I suppose I'm kind of just looking for some assurance that it won't be the budgets within directorates that would stop people transferring over. So we become one council on shared T's and C's on 50-50. That isn't going to be an issue going forward. Or maybe there might be something identified corporately as a council in the upcoming budget. I appreciate it's September, but then we're not far away from the budget now. So maybe a comment or two on how that's going to progress.
I'm getting Claire Edwards indicating, but I'll pass over to Claire and then add anything if you need.
Thank you, Chair. As you quite rightly pointed out, and in the report it does refer to that this will be considered as part of the 25-26 budget setting process. So we have identified that this action and activity will be incorporated and looked at as part of those assumptions that we'll need to put in and include. The risk is that it will be an increased cost to the organisation. So as we do with any budget setting process, we'll have to look at what savings we'll have to have within the whole budget setting arrangements to accommodate that as we go through that process.
Thank you. One question I've got is that has the council undertaken any work understanding how many members of staff may voluntarily assimilate to the new terms and conditions in both phases 2A and 2B? At the end of 2B, around what percentage of staff are you estimating will be on the new terms and conditions? And I know that you have that ambition of 80%, but have you done any work on some of those issues?
We have indeed. We've done some modelling, and it's a really difficult one to give an exact answer, as I'm sure you'll appreciate, because we make an assumption that pay is the only motivator for our employees around when they make that decision, if they want to volunteer or not. But actually there's a whole heap of terms and conditions that surround that. Some of them will be more favourable at some of the former councils, and some of them won't. So we can estimate based on pay that quite a large, number or proportion of the remaining workforce will take us to that 80% target, and we think it will. But actually, if a redundancy multiplier is more important to an individual because they had, a better redundancy package at their former council, for instance, we can't assume what motivates individuals. Some people that will matter, and it will be so our job as HR is to clearly, as Joe said, be really transparent about this is what we're offering on Northants pay terms and conditions. This is what your current contract protected offers. And then it has to be an individual choice, and the motivations, it adds an added level of complexity. Am I, confident that we'll reach that 80% target? I think we'll get really close, because I think, just looking at the data that we have, and what we did, of course, is look at where people's pay currently sat and where their job's likely to land in the new pay and grading. But that's purely based on a pay, scenario, because we can't really model individual motivations around what would encourage them or make them want to go, for the new terms and conditions. But so I'm sorry I can't give you an exact figure, but it's because it is quite complex, and I wouldn't want to read the minds of 1,400 staff.
Thank you. David, you wanted to come in.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to respond to comments by Councillor Griffiths and North with regards to the speed of the process. So throughout the work that we've been doing around pay and grading, we have been liaising with other local authorities that have unitarised and have been going through similar sorts of challenges. And I think largely there have been compliments about the progress and speed with which we have progressed. Absolutely, it's never quick enough, and my areas are some of those areas which have been greatly disadvantaged by being on poorer terms and conditions, and we've been keen to progress that moving forward. But it's absolutely essential that for us as a council that we make sure that we do that in a stable and intelligent way, so that we don't destabilise the organisation by rushing things through in a way that may mean that financially we cannot manage to do it in a safe way.
Councillor Mercer.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Well, the question I was originally going to ask 5 minutes ago has effectively been answered by Mr. Watts here, so that I don't need to ask that one. But I had a second question that I was going to ask anyway, and that was this. You say that roughly the workforce is 50-50 on the new terms of reference, terms and conditions, and 50% on the legacy ones. You also said that your staff churn is about just under 10%, Now, my question is this. Is that 10% predominantly in one 50% of the workforce or the other? In other words, are we losing more of the people on the legacy terms and conditions or more of the people on the new terms and conditions, or is it equally? Because depending upon, say, if we're losing people who are on the legacy terms and conditions, I would expect new hires to be on the new ones, so the percentage of people on the new terms and conditions should go up relatively fast. So I leave you with that question.
Before you take that, can I bring David back in, please?
I mean, hopefully I might be able to help that, because I'm responsible for about 1,800 of our employees at the moment. So I would say it's a really good question with a very difficult answer, if that makes sense. So different roles have different life cycles and churn in that sense. So for some of our entry-level roles, you may find that someone joined us on new terms and conditions, but their next role might not be with our organisation because they see something and they're not as invested with the authority. So it's a combination, Councillor Mercer, in that sense. You will find that there are people who are nearing the end of their career and choose to leave and move on, and they may well be on old terms and conditions, and then we can recruit on those new ones in that sense. But with the sheer range of job types, roles, entry level through to management, it's very difficult for us to say who might move on at that particular point.
Well, could I ask then that at some point you give us some indication from your studying of your own workforce of what percentages are churning from each of the two different groups, so that we can get some indication as to whether or not the new terms and conditions are, should we say, very, very popular or very unpopular, because it's only by comparing the churn in the two different groups that we can see that.
Marie?
Just to say, it is a complex picture. We can certainly try and find some analysis about, we'll certainly be able to identify whether they are on the new terms or the old terms. But pay isn't the only reason why people leave an organisation as well. So there's a whole heap of, it could be through career progression, it could be through moving. We get a lot of personal circumstances, moving away, family circumstances. So it wouldn't be the complete picture, but we could certainly break it down. We'd have to do some further analysis to find out is it the pay and grading that is, keeping people or not. But I think it is a bit more complex. But what we've seen is in some of the exit surveys that we do, people are much happier and less anxious about changes to their pay terms and conditions. So we'll certainly try and get some information. We just need to treat it with, I think, a little bit of caution.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. That would be most helpful.
Thank you very much. I'll bring Councillor Griffiths in quickly before councillors.
Yeah, just picking up on David's comment. I wasn't being critical because this was back in the engine room at Angel Square when we discussed this huge problem. And of course, at that time, we still had commissioners in at Northamptonshire County Council, and we were about to don masks, and there was an outbreak of a certain thing called COVID, which has had a huge impact. So we recognise, I'm sure all of us recognise the efforts that's been put in, and I just want to make that absolutely clear, Chair.
Thank you very much. Scott? Sorry.
Thank you very much.
Councillor
Brown. The report highlights that one of the potential risks are of staff leaving. It doesn't mention anything in regards to potential effects on staff morale and things like quiet quitting. I was just wondering if there's any kind of analysis being done on that, and it probably speaks to Councillor Mercer's question as well. How are we monitoring staff performance on old contracts and new contracts, things like that?
So the plan is that we will be carrying out another staff all staff survey, and we will certainly be exploring, you know, what engagement levels are like and how, you know, how morale is at the moment. So we plan to do that in November, and so we will have some outcomes of that staff, which will help us, you know, analyse some of the things that are going on and how people are feeling about the organisation, which is a big indicator. So hopefully we'll have some more intelligence.
Thank you. Councillor North.
Yes, sorry, Jen. I appreciate you wanted to want to move on. I just wanted to support what Councillor Griffiths just said, because I felt that was important for him to come back and come back on that. It is important because, although quite rightly I did say I endorsed and supported what Councillor Griffiths said in my remarks, it obviously was more on the intent of the compliments of just how much has happened in the time we've been here. And you know, and I appreciate Mr. Watts' response that certainly not rushing into things. You know, it was just actually more on the complimentary. And again, Councillor Griffiths is right. There was lots of things that were discussed in the engine room that still may have not been implemented or may never be implemented from the blueprint. So it wasn't a criticism, Chair, at all. I just wanted to be clear on that.
Thank you for that clarification.
Sheer amount of complimentary that the work that's happened.
Thank you. And the last one before I wrap up, it's noted that Phase 2 and 2B will be voluntary. Are the services areas having to fund the expected increase in salaries through their existing budgets, or is this being funded corporately? And if so, how is it being funded? Claire, I saw that finger go up.
Thank you, Chair. So it will probably be a combination of the two. So as I alluded to earlier, we'll be looking at this and considering it as part of the 25-26 budget process, together with working with service areas through their restructure to see if it can be accommodated. But we will also be looking at what provision we can set aside for Phase 2 as we start to work through that voluntary process of working with our HR colleagues around that implementation.
I do apologise, and I'm the one with the hearing problem. Thank you very much. I do have one holding recommendation, and that is the committee receives a further update on the pay and grading project at the conclusion of the implementation of 2B and a date to be decided, please. Is that all right? I'm sorry, I'm going to have to call a comfort break now.
Madam Chairman.
Sorry, we need two recommendations,
right.
Yes.
Is it possible to add a recommendation by way of thanks to our officers for the work they've done in getting us to this stage? Or suitable wording that I'm sure will receive support of our members?
Yes,
along the lines of what we were just discussing between Councillor North and I.
Councillor Mercer.
Can we also add a request that the officers provide the information they offered us earlier about comparison between new terms and conditions and old and the effect it's having on churn? It should be of interest, I think, to everyone. Thank you.
And we have some recommendations on page 12, and they are to note the progress that's being made, which we will do, and consider the information presented, which I think you've asked some brilliant questions, so thank you for that. Can I have a proposer, Councillor Marks? Seconder, Councillor Griffiths. Are we all in favour? Thank you very much, and I'm sorry I must have a comfort break. 3 minutes, everybody, please. Sorry. Thank you, everybody. Moving on to our agenda items. We have the performance indicator report. And I know we're going to keep our questioning quite succinct in this round. So, Tom, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. This report is the usual performance report which is brought to this committee. But it is slightly different this year because we've introduced the new performance management framework at the beginning of the financial year. So this takes us up to the quarter through to the end of June and was reported to the executive in August. In this report, the KPIs have been split into 3 groups in Appendix A, B and C. In Appendix A, there's a small set of core indicators which are reported monthly or collected monthly, and then that information is distributed to all members. In Appendix B, there's a broader set of 65 indicators which has a broader scope, covers more areas of the council, but is only reported quarterly, and it contains many indicators which we can only measure quarterly. And then Appendix C contains information about organisational health, organised into information about our financial operations and processes, our customer processes and our engagement with customers, and our workforce, which contains some of the indicators that Marie was referring to earlier, and that comes out quarterly as well. Across all of those indicators which have a target, 31% of those indicators are on or exceeding target, 18% are within tolerance, and 51% are performing under target. There are further highlights about the detailed indicators in the front part of the report. Other than that, I shall do my best to take any questions, but probably as usual in this conversation, I'll end up referring to colleagues around the table.
Thank you very much. So, moving on this one. The first question is mine. How is the council managing the announcement of changes by the government in planning and mitigating the impact on both council services and residents?
I think I'd probably best refer to pass to my colleague George. Did you say planning, Chair? Is that right?
No, in planning and mitigating the impact of both council services and to residents. So there's a lot of changes coming about. We know that there's a lot of changes coming about. How is the council going to plan and manage for those changes that are coming in, and is part of the question that was being asked. And I don't know if you would like to pass that on, or Sanjit.
Thank you, Chair. Is your reference in relation to legislative changes and other policy changes that might be coming through? Thank you, Chair, yes. That will be dealt with at individual directorate level as part of service planning processes. So when new legislation comes into play, new policies are introduced, dependent on the impact that's picked up at a directorate level as part of service planning.
Okay, thank you. David, did you want to come in there, or is it... Sorry, George.
Thank you. Yeah, I suppose I can just briefly update on devolution, because that's been fairly well documented by the new government thus far. And as members will know, we took a paper to council last week with regard to that. So we are certainly, as a council, looking to see what opportunities that provides. The legislative framework that surrounds devolution obviously is going to follow in the autumn. So we're sort of putting forward a commitment that we want to be part of the devolution discussions with central government. We're still working and having discussions with other local authorities, as well as looking at the data ourselves in terms of what the best fit would look like. And as you heard last week, there's a commitment made to brief all of the leaders of the political groups before any expression of interest is submitted, which obviously we'll need to do in the next couple of weeks. So that's a fairly significant piece of work that we're working on quite rapidly at the moment. The other is obviously there's quite a bit of change around housing and national planning policy and the changes to the framework there. There was an informative, unfortunately I missed it yesterday because I was otherwise engaged, but there was a very helpful executive advisory panel around planning communities, looking at our proposed response to the consultation on the National Planning Policy Framework. And there was a fairly lengthy paper that was attached to that discussion. So I would urge any members here that if they want to have a look at that paper, there's quite a lot of information in there in terms of our proposed response. I think I've said this before, I think we're in a reasonable position in terms of some of the housing targets that have been set for local government. We've seen, or we've been asked to see an uplift in our housing target of about 11%. Whilst not insurmountable, we know that we've still got to continue to work quite hard and work with our developers to continue the good and positive rollout of housing development across Northamptonshire. Obviously, we've got a number of urban extensions in development at the moment. A number of key phases have recently been approved, for example, at Hamwood Park in Kettering, Phase 2, and we're currently working with the developers at Glenvale to the northern part of Wellingborough there for their next phase. So there is good progress, but we can't be complacent as a local authority. But I think we are in quite a strong position in terms of that housing development and the numbers that central government are looking for. Thank you, Chair.
I have Councillor North, Councillor Mercer and Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. I can certainly confirm it was a long debate yesterday on that consultation. Just similar to yours, Chair, but more directed to, not obviously, but more directed to performance management. Obviously, we have Oflog, and we've talked to this room many times before about our own KPIs and those we have to report into government and so forth. And some governments are more stronger on performance management and reporting in than others. And that's not necessarily through political persuasion either, Chair. Has there been any indication yet of any possible changes on actually the amount of performance management and the amount that the government will require us to be reporting in? Because, as I've mentioned here before, Chair, I mean, it is useful that we have our own performance indicators, not just those set out by a government to report in on how they think we're doing against certain criteria. But anyway, that's just part of my angst on that. But in relation to the question, thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Tom.
Thank you, Chair. So we are a part of a regional performance management group that's run by the Local Government Association, and we use that as a mechanism for learning about potential developments in policy and changes coming from government. I understand pretty hot off the press. It happened, the last meeting was just the day before yesterday, and there was some discussion about offlog, but the government representative joining that meeting said there was no clear steer at this stage on whether there would be any change from the indicated direction of travel. So we are still working, therefore, within a framework of a small set of indicators that we've included in our performance framework and continue to report on, which are part of a public website that that Offlog has created. Obviously, we will continue to be members of that group and monitor the situation very closely, and be passing forward information as we get hold of it.
Thank you, Chair. My view won't change, but that's not your problem. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Mercer.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. In my experience, whenever we hear devolution, it usually means that the councils are going to lose powers that are going to go to somewhere else. It never goes down, it always goes up. I'm interested in the fact that we've got a number of performance indicators, KPIs, that we report on, but which represent activities that are outside our control. So, for instance, the number of schools that have good Ofsteds, since we don't directly control the schools, even though we fund them, the Direct Schools grant is actually passported through, I'm curious as to why we are assessed on something that is utterly outside our control.
Tom.
Thank you. I will talk a little bit about the balance in setting KPIs, and then I think David may want to come in specifically on schools. It is a challenge and something to be discussed when you're setting a performance framework and KPIs about the extent to which you want to set them, which are only measuring things which are in your control, or the extent to which, as a council, we have a responsibility for our residents and communities in the broad sense, and a part of partnerships which are trying to support improved outcomes for all people, not just those who are specifically using our services. And so, variously, there have been some sets of indicators. The government set a set of indicators called national indicators a few years ago, which went very broadly and were intended to be used by partnerships to monitor the outcomes for communities and residents. More broadly, I'd say our indicator framework is now tilted towards those things that we are in control of, but obviously then there are some parts where we're a crucial partner, and then that's stretching into indicators such as the ones about Ofsted ratings for schools, for example. We do have some more responsibilities in that area, I believe, and so that might be a good place for David to come in.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, Chair. It is a really interesting question in the sense that currently I have responsibilities as a Director of Children's Services, which are set out in statute, of which a number of those relate to education and educational excellence. How I deliver those is not necessarily through direct provision, albeit that we do have maintained schools. It is about the relationships that we develop with head teachers, with chief executives of academies, where we can see that there may be challenges around leadership or performance. We work closely with those, but also with the regional commissioners from the Department for Education to try and influence and improve education outputs and outcomes. So it is important that we do understand how performance happens in those areas, but it's also important to understand the context in which we are working as having those statutory responsibilities and delivering against those. So it's partly done through influence, partly done through the quality team that we have that works with schools, and partly done through our relationships with the DFE regionally.
Thank you very much. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. My question is about MPSO2 on page 48, and that is the estimated total value of contracts awarded to local suppliers following the procurement process being run to equal to or above £100,000. It's just, I note that there were 6 contracts with a value of between 100,000 and 900,000, so nearly £1 million, awarded to non-local suppliers. And the reason being given is it was placed through a mini competition or an external framework. I just wonder what that means, because I know we cannot find suppliers for everything we need locally. But based on the Bristol model, £1 spent locally adds £7 to our local economy. I just wonder, are we focusing on trying to place big contracts with local suppliers? Is that still something we value? Because I think we should. I just want reassurance that there's a good reason for it.
Sanjit.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Lee. That's not necessarily part of the performance reporting for this report, but I do understand the question. It is a local matter for directorates when they're considering procurement and the frameworks that they're working towards. And we do, as a council, take that sort of social value element seriously, but it's part of individual procurement, but that is something certainly that we can take away and see if we can elicit that, if we can drill down into that information. If it is possible, then we can provide that to members. If it's not, then we can confirm that.
Okay. Thank you very much. So I have a question. Can you explain what is meant by the number of households whose homelessness was relieved? Is this households who have now found permanent accommodation, or households removed from the housing list for reasons such as refusing suitable accommodation? Do we understand what's at the back of the data?
I think I might have to pass that one across, but I'm not sure whether we might need to go away and find out the precise detail of the definition of the KPI in that situation, Chair, unless David can pluck it from the depths of his mind.
David.
I believe that's called a hospital pass. Tom, thank you. So I'd prefer to get you a full definition of what we collect in relation to that. My understanding is that it is about the active intervention of us as a local authority, so removal of someone from an application because they've refused something is generally because we have exhausted our statutory responsibilities. Whether it comes under that definition of relieved, I will need to double check for you, so I'd prefer to give you the right answer, Chair.
Thank you very much. Moving on from that one then, the improvement in the number of households in temporary accommodation is welcomed, with a consistent fall in the numbers following a high of 276 in April. What initiatives has the Council introduced to remove households out of temporary accommodation, and how can this reduction be sustained?
I'm afraid that the detail of the precise initiatives I don't have at my fingertips, so I'm sorry, Chair, I think we probably would need to come back to you on that one.
Okay, and do you want to come back in, David?
Thank you, Chair. A number of different initiatives. So we work, primarily it's about trying to support people into permanent accommodation in that sense, and we do that by working with social landlords in the area, provision of our own accommodation, but also working with private sector landlords around the different sorts of accommodations which they've got. Similarly, there'll be work that's being done through our planning, through development around the amount of affordable housing that's made available across Northamptonshire, which we ideally would want people from Northamptonshire to benefit from and be able to come in rather than people moving in from outside the area. There's always more that we can be doing in that space, and I think my primary aim around housing is to prevent people from needing to be in temporary accommodation full stop. That's a huge target for us to set, but it's one of those bits which we need to hold ourselves to, and that should always be our aim. I think as if we're seeing positive trajectories, then that's evidence of our interventions working in that sense. But we can't rest on our laurels. There are a number of things which led to that increase, as you say, for a high within April. So things like cost of living have been a challenge and led to more tenancies failing. There are lots of things that can potentially impact on that, and it's for us to be wise to what's happening in the housing market environment, and trying to be quite agile in how we deal with it and how we work with providers of accommodation as well as ourselves as a provider of accommodation.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mercer.
I've got two questions this time, I'm afraid. First one, what the government has said they're likely to remove the statutory right to buy for council house tenants. What impact will this have on the finances of the housing revenue account? That's the first one. And the second one, which is perhaps more concerning and more direct, I think, the government has made, the Prime Minister has just made a speech in which he said that the health service will have to reform, but it will not get any more money. I presume that is its funding will probably rise with inflation, but not any faster. Now, given that we are getting tightly entwined with the NHS via the integrated care process, how do you expect the government's reform of the NHS to affect our social care offering? So two, I'm afraid, rather dangerous questions there for you.
Passing over to you, David.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's probably very difficult to answer those questions at the moment because announcements do not necessarily mean that those things get embedded into legislation. But there is a significant amount of guidance that would surround that we have to consider before we can make assumptions about it. I mean, on the face of it, I can talk about right to buy and some of those elements which we experience now. So effectively, the housing revenue account loses money on every right to buy sale that it has because it's selling at a significant discount rather than at market value. So if that were to come forward, that may have a positive impact in that sense. But what it does mean is less people that are perhaps more financially challenged to be able to get onto the housing market would be able to. But I am speculating quite significantly in a similar way any reforms in the NHS and the potential impact which they have on adult social care. Our relationships are such that I would have to consider that guidance and we would be consulted as a sector on the potential proposals and implications of implementation at that point. It's too early in those announcements for us to be able to give a consistent steer on what that impact might be. I can speculate, but I couldn't give you an accurate picture of what the impact would be.
Can I ask then that as soon as you have something positive, you report to both the executive and to this committee about it, so that we do get the earliest possible information about it?
Certainly from my perspective, if there was change in legislation, we would be advising the executive around that. There would be the opportunity for the executive advisory panels to understand the implications as well. But I know that Claire does wish to come in on this as well.
Yes, Claire.
Thank you, Chair. And I think just to sort of come back on that question, add to what David said, I think theoretically, if these were implemented. One is that it stops the erosion of our housing stock, which is what we would be looking to as a positive impact. One of the other flip side to that would be the fact that as we are not selling off our housing stock, we are not acquiring capital receipts, and our ability to be able to develop land or housing would diminish. So there's a bit of a double-edged sword. If once we understand what those regulations may or may not imply, then we'd understand but those are the sort of two sides of that coin that could theoretically play out if they then withdraw the right to buy scheme. If that answers some of your questions. We couldn't necessarily articulate financially what that would be, but once we do understand it, we'd have a theoretical hypothesis of what we would be able to see that's gone through the HRA based on historical data.
I'll try and explain what my concern is. The housing revenue account is ring-fenced. We cannot take money out of it or put money into it. It has an annual capital budget, which isn't just for building new council houses, but also for repair work, substantial repair work, where it reaches the level of being capital rather than revenue. If you have no council house sales, then the capital reserves do not grow. They simply shrink. So at some point, the capital reserves will reach a low figure where you can no longer do some of the things that we do currently. That is the concern that I was trying to lead up to and ask what the implications of that would be.
Okay. Coming back, Claire.
Yeah, so just to sort of walk you through that. So the capital contribution that the HRA makes is based on the housing value. So the value of the housing stock is what determines the capital set aside that we have to do through the accounting regulations. So the more houses we have, the higher capital contribution that we will be able to make, not lower. So this is where I think that understanding is slightly probably off. So the more we can retain our housing stock, the more capital contribution that we can make, because you'll have high rents and so on. So it's making sure that we can maintain our housing stock and not erode it. Does that answer your question?
I don't think so, because the rent is revenue income, not capital income. So you would be having to transfer revenue to the capital budget. And that is theoretically possible, but it always makes me uncomfortable when you're forced to do something like that. So that's my concern there. It's not clear to me what the real implications are, because the government has not given any details, as Mr. Watts has said. And they may change some of the rules about how the housing revenue account is funded, but there is a vulnerability there, because effectively we have said no more money will go into the capital account of the capital budget in the HRA. That's the problem. Effectively, we've said we're turning off the tap to it.
No, not at all. So it's a rather technical, and it'd probably be best that we take this offline, because the accounting regulations do allow us to make a contribution from revenue into capital.
I know they do, but what I said was I feel uncomfortable when you rely upon capital being funded by revenue.
It's always been that way, and it's probably not going to change, and the right to buy proposed legislation won't affect that accounting regulation. We can take that offline.
It is getting too technical, as you said.
Yeah.
Perhaps best taken offline, yes.
Thank you very much for that, everybody. Councillor Griffiths.
I think the third point that you were going to raise, Madam Chairman, would have actually helped on this a little bit. But there's so much happening in this area with government policy, new government policy around right to buy, around changes to rental, etc., that could impact on this. But we've just got to keep a close eye on it. And one of the reasons we've got to keep a close eye on it is because we appear to have bucked a trend. And there is a perception out there that high levels of immigration are having an effect on availability of housing for local people. So it is something that we've got to keep a close eye on. I say that's a perception, but it's something that I want to see whether it is a perception or whether there is any evidence of that moving forward. So this would make an ideal thing to look at the next meeting, Madam Chairman, when things have settled down a little bit, perhaps?
Sorry, I think that we're going to go into budget scrutiny before that comes back. But I know that one of the recommendations that we will be making is around, what impact that will, new government guidelines will have on our budgets in this sort of coming year, next year. So we'll make that recommendation that a briefing note comes back to. I don't know whether or not the immigration should be part of that briefing paper or not. Okay. Councillor Griffiths, you had another question to ask. Next one. I think so.
The performance indicator for education healthcare plans completed in 20 weeks has consistently underperformed both in this quarter and the previous quarter. Is this performance due to a lack of resources within the team, or are the cases now more complex and therefore taking longer to process? With the start of the school year beginning within the last week, what impact has this performance had on children being able to start school, and what is being done to get the performance within target?
Tom.
I think David probably better take this one, Chair.
David.
Thank you, Chair. Absolutely, Councillor Griffiths. Certainly the performance is not where we would want it to be. It isn't actually about resources within the team at this moment in time. So there were significant resources put in over the previous year by the executive to the tune of around 18 additional members of staff. Equally, at the most recent council, you may recall that within the capital and revenue budget update, there was additional funds agreed for in-year to enable us to make those posts longer term, more permanent in that sense, and a slight increase to that by another 5 as well. So that isn't the issue. The primary issue for us around completion within that 20-week period is not being able to name the provision that we expect those children and young people to go into. So for every educational healthcare plan that we have to be able to say at the end that this is the particular school or alternative provision that the child will go to. And what we can often find is that we'll go through the process and we might have to approach, and I've had some of these coming across my desk, 15 to 20 different providers to see whether they will accept that child in that sense. So our big challenge is sufficiency of the appropriate placements that we have within Northamptonshire. Now that's not a challenge which is just particular to Northamptonshire. It is a national challenge around the number of special educational school places, the types of alternative provision. What you may also recall is that I think probably for the last 3, possibly 4 executive meetings, we've had additional capacity funded and agreed to enable us to increase the number of places. But a number of those don't come on immediately because it might require us to do capital changes to, capital builds or adaptations within some of our existing school stock across Northamptonshire, and that takes time to do. So some of those additional places have come on board from September of from this term. We have some additional places which are coming on from October as well, but there are also further adaptations that will grow over the next year as well. So one example being Wilby Primary School and the repurposing of that for up to an additional 30, circa 30 places, but that's going to be done in a phased approach in that sense. So it's not about staffing resources, it's about sufficiency of placement. And that is a significant issue because the cost of building, for example, an additional special educational needs school is in the tens of millions of pounds. And we are sort of dependent on new schools building programmes coming forward and for us being able to bid into those. But that's, again, not a quick fix for us. When you look at the demand of additional requirements that we've seen over the last 4 years or so, if that continues, that growth is unsustainable for us, and we need to look at different ways of trying to manage that. How do we wrap support around children and young people in their existing mainstream schools? So hopefully that gives you an idea of the challenge which it is, but it's not about staffing resource at the moment. It's about sufficiency of the right types of placement in the right areas within our area.
Thank you for that, David. And I am mindful, of course, that you have two very important roles, and I'm just hopeful that our DCS can hit the ground running on this, because it is something that affects young people and their families. So thanks for that.
Thank you. Councillor Brown? Sorry. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is about BPF 33 on page 32, about the number of children who are absent from education. In the short term, the direction of travel is down, fortunately, but the cohort of children who've been absent for more than 12 months has 28 more children than it did 1 year ago. So how is the Council supporting those families whose children have been absent from education for prolonged periods to ensure that those absences are not leading to any safeguarding concerns? That's my question.
I think he's passed the ball to you again, David.
No, that's absolutely right. I mean, it's my area of work, and Tom's job is to interpret and present that information to you. It's my job to give you the assurances around the services that we're providing. So thank you, Councillor Lee, for that question. Absolutely, for every child that is deemed to be missing from education, we do work very closely with parents, but also with schools where people are temporarily missing from education. Our primary aim is to support them back into that education setting as soon as possible. And there can be a variety of reasons for people missing from education. So, for example, we tend to see a bit of an increase over between the summer term and then the start of the autumn term, because quite often what you can see is people may move out of the area over summer holidays and not notify us. So we may be expecting a child to be attending school, but actually they've moved into another area. That's just one example, but there are a myriad of examples. But we do have particular teams that support, look at the alternative provisions. We do provide independent tutoring for those that are temporarily or perhaps permanently excluded from school as a result of missing. But it's possibly one of those areas where it might be helpful for us to consider doing an all-councillor briefing so that we can talk in a bit more detail around the sorts of interventions that are put in place and how we make sure that those children are safeguarded whilst they're absent from educational settings. And I'd be more than happy to ask Fran, who is our new interim assistant director for education, to consider how we could pull together a session and maybe put it on in a similar way to those others that we have around things like housing.
Thank you, that would be welcome.
Thank you very much. And we have two recommendations. The first one is whether or not maybe the new director of children's bringing to a meeting to explain how you obviously there's a growth in need, and obviously which is why we have problems. So explain how you're going to forecast the provision in future years. I can see Councillor Mercer wants to come in on this one.
I wanted to support that recommendation. I've seen forecasts of increases of up to 60% in the special education needs demand. That is completely unsustainable in the long term. I would love to know what the analysis shows is the cause for that. Is it a blip caused by the COVID lockdown that's working its way through the system, where children who were deprived of access to playmates have suffered? Or is it something else? Is it perhaps that we have changed our definition of what is special education needs? There's a number of possible answers, and that is why I suggested that recommendation.
David, can we go quickly and wrap this session up, and then we can move on, because we've still got 2 reports.
Absolutely. A huge amount of work going into pupil place planning for both mainstream and special educational needs, and that's one which Tom could absolutely answer in the future, because he's heavily involved in that. You know, we would be more than happy to provide an update on what that process is and how we move that forward. With Councillor Mercer, the reasons, variety of different things. So yes, there is a COVID cohort of people moving through. Quite a significant spike, in the sense that it's not just school-age children that perhaps miss some of those compulsory years, but it's actually early years as well, where children were not able to attend their parent and toddler groups, where they perhaps weren't going to nursery in that sense. And that's a group of young people that we will see moving through the school system for the next X number of years, and we can expect that demand to continue to grow for a number of years. I think some thought is around at least until 2028, and then it sort of levels off, and it's that group of people moving through the school system. So we'll still possibly see having to support that group of people up until their secondary education with additional support in that sense. But perhaps rather than getting into a conversation about it, we can do you that briefing on it, tell you how we come into those assumptions.
Thank you very much.
That's why I asked for the recommendation, yeah.
And the other recommendation is obviously the housing one, having a briefing how it will impact us as a council in the future on that one. Can I have a proposer and seconder, please? Proposer, Councillor Marks. Seconder, Councillor Lee. Are we all in favour of those recommendations? Thank you very much. Moving swiftly on. We have the budget forecast update Q1. As obviously Mark isn't here, can I pass this one over to Claire, please, for an update?
Thank you, Chair. So the report that's brought before you today, which is attached in Appendix A, is the revenue forecast outturn for period 3, which is based on the activity up to the 30th of June. So currently the forecast is showing and indicating an overspend for the general fund of 8.4 million, an underspend of 343,000 on the HRA, and an overspend of 10.6 million on the dedicated schools grant. The summary of the key assumptions are shown and set out in section 2, with further detailed analysis in section 5 to 7. I won't go through all of it and assume that you have read it. What we are seeing here in terms of our forecasted outturn is reflective of the national landscape of the demand-led services in particular, and across the national picture that we're also seeing in local government. So whilst we currently are showing an overspend, in particular in our general fund of 8.4 million, the council, as part of its budget setting, also holds a contingency of 4.1 million, which is yet to be offseen against unforeseen costs. So whilst that is obviously there to be utilised, we are encouraging directors across their whole services to work along mitigating some of these pressures in year prior to any of that contingency being utilised. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, and I have Councillor Lee on this one first.
Thank you. The Children's Trust overspend is forecast at 6.71 million, and the cost of 6,071,000, I think. The cost of which this council is 2,068,681 million. Do you have confidence that this will remain steady throughout the year? Are you expecting it to rise?
Thank you, Chair. So I am assured that during conversations that we are currently undertaking with myself and the portfolio holder with the Children's Trust on a regular basis, that the activity and spend that we're seeing through the Children's Trust is actually stabilising. There's been some really encouraging transformation programmes that we've undertaken, working with Circle to Success and Empower, and that's really starting to pay dividends. So we're now starting to go into a transitional period of stability within the Children's Trust. So I'm really keen to see that that is maintained throughout this financial year, and those assurances are definitely coming through with working closely with the Children's Trust.
Thank you. David.
Thank you, Chair. I'd echo the points that Claire made. The other point that I would make, which I'm surprised Claire didn't, was that there was significant investment put in last year in the budget setting for this year, which bridged the gap between effectively the overspend from prior years. So we have a greater level of confidence, and absolutely through the work that we've seen through the Transformation and Efficiency Board, there is significant improvement in supporting children and young people in different ways. So we have seen a positive step change. As is the case with demand-led services, can we guarantee it? Probably not, but what we want to do is try and make sure that as much as possible that current overspend is mitigated in year wherever possible, and hopefully will not grow any further.
Sorry, can I just bring in Councillor Norton, then I'll bring in Councillor Mercer.
Thank you, Chair. That is encouraging to hear, because obviously since this council started, we've obviously had continuous reports in relation to the overspend from the Children's Trust and the assurances that not always come through. The only concern, not the only concern, but obviously one of the concerns I have off the back of that, which is, and I appreciate what has been said, but obviously one of the big costs is staffing, and I guess that will, personally think that will continue to increase, Chair. And of course, the other concerns I have is in inflation and the country, stagnating last month. If we've got limited growth and inflation starts to increase again, and staff costs, I would have thought that would have put extra pressure again on some of the key areas. And in spite of what's just been said, which is great, those pressures are still there and out of their control and this council's control. So I think those things I just mentioned do still concern me: the state of the economy, the inflation, and obviously the staff pressure costs.
Obviously, it's just concerns, but I know how well you mitigate things going forward. After you, Claire.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And obviously it is one of our key risks in the assumptions that we've made within our budget, and it will continue to be a risk going forward. As I said, the contingency is there for those reasons, for unseeable costs, but obviously within the assumptions that we have within our forecasting, we try to obviously ensure that we've covered as many of those risks that we have, but there will always be policy and economic issues that we cannot obviously control or foresee.
Councillor Mercer first, and then I'll come to Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm particularly interested in interest rates. It's the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee is very predictable and tends to be a lagging actor in the market. They tend to reduce or increase interest rates after I would have done. They've recently indicated that interest rates are about to go down, but then I've seen elsewhere there is indications that they're about to go back up again. Would it be possible to do some, well, I wouldn't say do some modelling because that's a bit extensive, but give some indications in the near future about what the effect on the capital budget, revenue budget and HRA will be about different interest rate levels. So if it goes down to 3%, how does it affect us? If it goes up to 6%, how does it affect us? Because we're both a borrower and a lender, and therefore the effect of interest rates is not trivial on us. It will affect our budget for the coming year. So I'd be interested to know if you can bring that forward at some point.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we'll take that away and bring that back for your information. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Excellent.
Councillor Griffiths.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And I took the opportunity of speaking to a couple of former colleagues and council leaders. We're facing this, so are other councils facing similar problems with overspends and shortfalls on those big areas. Nobody likes them, but of course what we're waiting for is a government settlement. We don't know what that's going to be either, do we? So I think we are in, again, a little bit of a limbo situation, as all councils are. So I think we recognise these figures, we recognise the challenge that the Trust has got, and I just think we've got to do our very best to keep within budget and pray that this new government comes up with a reasonable settlement for local government.
Thank you. Councillor Mercer. Sorry. I'm having difficulty hearing everything because of the musical accompaniment, which seems to be focused somewhere at this side of the room. Boom, 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 boom. Right. The dedicated schools grant, there appears to be a deficit forecast of over 10 million. Now, the DSG is a direct funding chunk from government to the schools, which we act as a gatekeeper for to push it through. Now, my question is this. Where there's forecast to be a deficit of the DSG, who funds it? Claire.
Thank you, Chair. I will start this and then probably hand over to my colleague, David. So essentially what we're looking at here is that where you have a statutory override for any surplus or deficits within the dedicated schools grant. So at the moment they're sort of off balance sheet is probably the term I want to use. And if that statutory override is taken away, then that cost of that deficit would fall to the council to be able to fund. So there's a real risk around the DSG with the continued deficit in future years that we would have to be able to at least have a cashback reserve to fund that. And that's one of the biggest challenges that we've got around this. And obviously there's lots of different issues that we're looking at in terms of the potential, whether there's a write-off going forward that the government may want to do. But again, it's all assumptions in terms of what that might look like. And obviously what's reflected in there is the activity that we've just talked about in terms of the SEND and looking at those positive steps that we can start to take to change that deficit on the dedicated schools grant with sufficiency of placements. And that's really the key to some of the activity that we're trying to look at and how we can work through that. And David and colleagues have actually been working with the DfE in working through a deficit recovery plan and safety valve. So I'll probably hand over to David at this point to sort of walk you through some of those activities that we've been doing.
David.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Chair. So in addition to the points which Claire has made, so the last time there was a dedicated schools grant reset was in 2019. So we're probably about due that, which is where they look at effectively some of those challenges and effectively rebase those budgets. What we've seen over the period of time since the previous census to the most recent census was a 13.5% growth in our population, some of that at our school age as well. That's in comparison to an 8% growth as the England average. So you can see some of the influencing factors. You know, if we've seen a 13.5% growth in our school-aged population, then we will have seen the same around our special educational needs, or similar in that sense. Where the overspend is predominantly happening within our DSG is the high needs block. There are 3 blocks to the dedicated schools grant: early years, schools block, and the high needs block. And the majority of that overspend is on high needs. It's on the additional support that we either fund to support people in mainstream schools, or in that purchase of independent sector provision where children and young people are unable to attend a mainstream school in that sense. Just the other point which Claire made reference to was some of our recent discussions with the Education Skills Funding Authority, which is going to be absorbed into the DfE, so it won't be a standalone organisation. We have met with them recently to talk with them about some of our modelling assumptions that we have around our expected demand, but I've also explored some of the potential solutions that we are thinking about. The most recent discussion was a little bit of a challenge because our ESFA colleagues were unable to confirm with us what the position would be around things like the safety valve funding, and whether there would be opportunities for local authorities to tap into that. What I would say from speaking to other directors of children's services is that actually those additional arrangements are often very challenging and very difficult to deliver against. So there are a number of local authorities that have significantly greater overspends against their DSGs. So there are a couple of large counties that have overspends in excess of £100 million against their dedicated schools grants. And they have been supported through the safety valve process, but have been unable to recover their budgets in the period of time that they were expected to when they've been in that intervention in that sense. So their overspends have continued to grow. So again, it's a national picture which is challenging. I think it is one of those things that we're looking to government to support significantly, but we're not entirely looking at. We're very much looking at what are the mitigating steps that we can take. How can we work with our schools? How can we work with our other alternative provision to make sure that we're supporting people with lower additional costs on top of that, and supporting people to be independent? And that's very much thinking about, well, what can we do in that early years space? How can we identify children and young people much earlier and intervene in a way so that they don't go and they and their families do not go into crisis. But it's certainly something that there's a huge amount of our internal resource going into, not just from my teams, but from Claire's finance teams, from Tom's performance team, to try and understand what's the scale of the ask that we've got, and what would be the impact of some of the mitigations that we're intending to put in, because that may require us to invest more, but the benefits that we see over the medium to longer term may warrant us taking some of those calculated risks around those investments to enable us to do that. And that does mean things like potentially additional capital asks which have revenue implications for us, but us expecting to see the revenue benefits appearing later down the line. I think one of the other challenges that we do have around DSG is that sometimes it requires us to put investment in the general fund for us to see a saving in the DSG, and that's because of the rules which we have around that grant, which says we can't. So, for example, our educational healthcare staff that are undertaking the assessments are funded from general fund, but the benefit of them doing their activity is seen in the DSG. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think the term that has not yet been used is the term unfunded mandates. We're given a whole series of responsibilities by central government, regardless of party. And to a great extent, not only are we given those responsibilities, but how we are to deliver them is laid out in legislation. And yet we are responsible for the financial implications to a great extent. That is fundamentally unsound, both democratically, in terms of democratic accountability, and also financially.
Thank you. Okay. Moving on. Adult social care, Hanley.
Yes. It's just a report explains there may be further emerging risks during the year on an already volatile budget in adult social care, including unexpected increases in demand during the winter. We just wonder what mitigations will be put in place to try and manage those budget pressures.
David.
Thank you, Chair. Absolutely. I mean, members may recall that we experienced quite a significant challenge in the winter of last year, in that the usual trends that we would expect to see, it's not a nice way of saying it, but we tend to see more deaths within the winter, didn't pan out the way that we expected them to. And that's based on looking at prior year trends and understanding the different fluctuations of people that we have in receipt of adult social care. However, as a part of that, we developed a financial recovery programme, a number of sprint projects, so sprint projects being short-term projects, which identified a significant number of actions that we could be undertaking to try and recover that position. However, when we were setting budget for this year, we didn't know that those trends were going to happen. So we've almost started the year in deficit as a result of that, because we didn't fully understand the implications. So we have commissioned some additional support to look at our current savings programmes that we have, evaluate the effectiveness of that, and look at whether we can stretch some of those savings programmes, but also explore areas where perhaps we're not as well developed as other local authorities in delivery against that. That is due to report back to us in October, which would hopefully feed into our budget setting for next year. But any additional benefits that we get from that we can implement in year will deliver some additional benefit for our in-year challenge. What we can say against both the medium-term and sprint project targets that we have, that we're already performing at 60% delivery, over a 60% delivery against that, with a number of our programmes overachieving. So we're relatively confident if we can keep the amount of activity that we're doing, and that we don't, and with a fair wind, that we will over-deliver on some of our savings trajectory for the year. We're being prudent in how we call those out within the budget process at this moment in time, just to make sure that we are confident against the delivery of those for the end of this financial year.
Thank you. Home to school transport. This one's yours, Scott.
Thank you very much. It was clear that there were some high-profile issues with home to school transport at the start of this term. Could you provide an update on what happened and what is being put in place to ensure that it does not happen again?
Sorry, George. Yes, please.
No, that's fine. Yes, so I suppose in relation to this report, there is increased demand. I'm trying to link your question back to the report, Councillor Brown, but so there is an increased demand in home to school transport per se, mainly around the transportation of children with special educational needs. What we experienced this particular in the last few weeks is a further increase in demand. So just to give you some figures, and that's both in special educational needs and in transportation of those children and young people that are eligible for mainstream, statutory mainstream provision. So, for example, those that were eligible for the statutory mainstream provision for the entire school year totaled 988. So far, we've had over 1,100 applications up until the 10th of September. So we're seeing a fairly significant increase in what I would call the mainstream provision. We're also seeing a fairly significant increase as well in new special educational needs applications as well. So again, for example, for the entire school year last year, we saw 598 applications. We're already just under 800 up until the 12th of September. So I suppose what that's demonstrating is we're seeing an unprecedented increase in demand, and that alongside what we then have to do is we then have to, when we get those applications in, is we have to look at how best to optimise those routes so that we manage that provision within the budgets that we've got. So there's quite a lot of route optimisation that has to take place. And then obviously we need to get that communicated out to parents, to schools, and so on. And because of the increase in demand, that all took longer than was anticipated. Hence, there were some issues at the beginning of term that were well documented, as we know. What we're doing at the moment is we are, as you can tell, we're getting regular updates on the figures sort of every 2 days. That's why I'm able to quote you some figures this evening. And we've done a very high level review of some of the issues that have prompted this so that we can start to build our learning for next year. Just so that you're aware, obviously there's also a series of appeals when parents don't get their first school and therefore take it to appeal hearings. If they're successful, then we have to then manage the transportation provision, and so some of these requests for transport will continue through until probably October, so before it starts to settle down. So we are cognizant of the issues. As members will know, we have made a public apology through Councillor Binley, and we are sorry for the issues that have caused some angst, particularly for Year 7 students as well, starting secondary school. We will be providing a more detailed update in terms of the learning, and we're happy to bring that back to Scrutiny for consideration as part of any future work programmes. So, but yeah, it's something that we're very cognizant of in the home school transport team.
Thank you very much. Before I come to you, Councillor Griffiths, we are getting very close to our guillotine. and just want to ask if we can finish the close of business tonight. Do we have a proposer for that? Councillor Marks, and a seconder, Councillor Griffiths.
Happy to second it, providing we can move on at pace, Madam Chairman.
Yes, we do need to be more in our questions and answers. Thank you. Are we all in agreement? Yes. Thank you very much. Councillor Griffiths.
Well, I'll be very succinct then, Madam Chairman. And I welcome the Council's apology to parents and children that were affected by this. And I think the unfortunate thing is the timing when it coincided with the Council heralding some transport schemes that they were progressing. And I think that was the unfortunate part of it, which didn't help the situation. But I think the Council was right to apologise and learn from the mistakes, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor North.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, we've got the budget setting coming up, clearly. And I suppose we're just kind of looking for some reassurance that when we come to the setting in the turn of the year, not the review at the end of this year, that we've got some assurance that the modelling and the forecasting is going to be better. So obviously when we set a budget, we have a bit more assurance that this obviously won't happen next autumn as well. And I know there's been ongoing issues since we took this on from the county days, but it's just that obviously the huge the amount of getting caught like this that as I said, when it comes to setting the budget, we've got some assurance.
Thank you, Councillor North. I have one recommendation.
That was a question, Chair.
Sorry? Was it a question? Sorry, I do apologise. George?
So briefly, home-to-school transport and demand is a national issue and is being recognised by both the previous and the current government. We have built into the medium-term financial plan financial uplift into the home-to-school transport budget, but clearly we'll need to keep that under review in light of the increase in demand this year. But that it is built into the medium-term financial plan for fairly significant uplifts in the next 3 years. I'm looking to my learned colleague across the room as well.
Thank you, Chair. And obviously, to concur with what George has said, yes, we have significant uplifts in, and obviously, but we are obviously looking at other areas to mitigate those across the whole piece in the MTFP as well.
Thank you very much. So I do have one recommendation, holding recommendation, and that is a report is brought to a future meeting on the implications of various interest rates of the council, which is what was raised by Councillor Mercer. We also have a recommendation that we note the report. Can I have a thank you, Councillor Mercer, and a seconder? Councillor North, is everybody happy with that? Thank you very much. Moving on to the last one, the capital outturn report. Obviously, Dean isn't here either, so I'll move over to Claire for this report.
Thank you, Chair. And I will try to be succinct in going through this report. So this report that's brought before you is for the capital outturn for period 3, as based on the activity up to the 30th of June. In Appendix A, the report shows in 5.2 that the capital for the general fund, the capital outturn is as underspend of 14.1 million. Additionally, within this report, we have put in another table of 5.3, which is trying to show the significant underspends and trying to explain why they are underspending and looking at whether we can obviously work through that as we go through the in-year reporting to provide more information for members. So in Appendix A, there's detailed analysis of the projects by directorate that are over 500,000. For the HRA, we're showing in paragraph 5.9 an underspend of 2.6, which is further explained in the appendices in the report in Appendix B. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Do we have any questions? I had one, but I think you've covered the answer, so I don't have to ask that question. And we, apart from the recommendation at is that one? The capital outturn. Sorry. That we note and the report and use it in our... So, seconded. Everybody's at it. Thank you very much. I think everybody wants to go home. Maybe that's an understatement. So that again is carried. Thank you so much, and I do apologise.
We've got a work programme just to note.
Oh, right.
Now.
Work programme just to note for now.
Is that okay?
Okay, so I need a propose, seconder, Councillor Griffin. Everybody in agreement?
Just before the guillotine.
Ooh. Close to the wire.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, I will officially close the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Safe journey home.
I think the Opus took 1 hour, and I knew straight away, an hour and 5 minutes, I knew we will be running behind later on. Yeah. But I didn't want to stop them because they made an effort, and you've been asking them to come for a long time.
Yeah.